Hello and welcome to my second discussion, and this one concerns idolizing, and I would loosely define that as giving something too much importance, looking up to something, revering something. So here I'm going to refer to some notes that I made beforehand and then give a small discussion on it. Why I believe that idolizing something can lead to distortion. We all sometimes have a tendency to give too much importance to some things or someone. We make things the source of our joy or sustenance that will eventually let us down, because no thing is perfect and anything can be taken away from us. In theological terms, this is known as idolatry. In psychiatry, it is known as either addiction or an obsession. And it leads to our perceptions being distorted. And being disillusioned, we do not always perceive of our problems and all the bad, unproductive behaviours that are resulting. We can sometimes live in denial. We tend to think of addiction or obsessions as a small issue in society that a small minority struggle with, or rather, something that affects everyone, rather than something that affects everyone, albeit in different ways. Our tendency when addicted is to surround ourselves with others who share the same addictions. Thus, they will tend not to view what we are doing as wrong. We think someone can't judge us for something that they are also doing. Surrounding ourselves with others with the same addictions or obsessions normalizes our behavior, but we are living in a bubble, excluding ourselves from meeting others who, although they have their own addictions or obsessions, have different ones. Thus, other people are often very aware of how we are acting, and we are often aware of other people's problems, more than our own sometimes. Heavy drinkers, alcoholics, often will socialise with other heavy drinkers and drug addicts, with other drug addicts. Zealots obsessed with religious ideas will tend to socialise with other zealots. Fans of a particular person, or obsessive fans, will tend to associate in the like with some that share those beliefs. Those obsessed with power, or sex, or shopping, or media, or even an idea will tend to associate with those that also support those beliefs, because it supports the addiction or obsession, which can have a powerful grip over our lives if we allow it to. It's not that we exclusively socialise with only those who have the same obsessions, but that we tend to avoid the confrontation with others who would be more critical of our behaviours, perceiving them as abnormal and harmful to others and potentially ourselves. If one treats anything as God, as infallible, all-loving, sustaining, then I believe it will inevitably let us down. All things can come and go. You could lose anything, the very thing that you depend upon, be it a house, a car, a drug, money, power, family, friends. All these things could be taken from us. All these things we could lose. It's not necessarily wrong to have any of these things, although it may be in some cases, but to idolise them is what creates the problem, for ourselves and for others. In fact, most of us have many addictions and obsessions, but we often have some degree of control over them. Some disorders may be widespread, and when it's so prevalent, we may not view it as a disorder, feeling that there's safety in numbers. Yet neither a thought nor behaviour becomes right or wrong according to how many people do it. Often the hardest obsessions are things that can actually be good for us in moderation, useful, a blessing even. If you use it rightly, if we consider money, this can be very useful and it can be used to benefit ourselves and also many others. There's nothing wrong with having money. In fact, using it responsibly is a challenge that one should take seriously. However, as the old saying goes, the love of money is the root of many evils. Yet acquiring it legitimately, using it well to assist your fellow man, can indeed be a great thing. Often we will look down on someone who has a different addiction than our own without realizing our own. I had and still have a tendency to moan and complain, and I get to a point where it becomes part of a daily routine, and I couldn't imagine living without it sometimes. In fact, even today I find myself moaning and groaning. And whilst it certainly is legitimate and necessary sometimes to complain, you can still get into a habit of overdoing it, where you over-rely on it and you're doing it just for the sake of doing it, without any purpose and without it being of any benefit to me. One of the things that we idolise the most is other people. We can be such a wonderful source of love to each other, sometimes. But also, we can hate each other sometimes, and the things that we do to each other. We can all have tendencies to idealise someone. It's great to want someone to improve towards an ideal self, but to view someone as already perfect and to act uncritically towards them can actually prevent them from growing. This idolising of other people has occurred for thousands of years, and still we as humanity struggle with it today. In severe cases, it can lead us to trust people too much, so that they may appear as godlike and beyond any suspicion, above any investigation, above criticism that's fair, which can easily be a pretext for some kind of hidden abuse, if someone is treated in such a superior fashion. And no man is above being judged fairly, if it is a fair investigation. How often have we heard these accounts where people that seemed beyond any scrutiny had hidden some kind of abuse? When anyone genuine should always welcome any fair investigation, if it is indeed fair. Indeed, we should seek to hold each other to account and seek to be honourable to each other by being honest. We all as humans do good sometimes and do bad sometimes. We all have some corruption within us, especially the longer that you tend to live, the more chance of doing more corruption. The amount, of course, can vary hugely, but you don't get to being an adult without having done lots of things wrong and said lots of hurtful things. And if you don't think that's you, then you may have idealised yourself, as many of us are prone to do. Not to say you won't have said and done many, many good things as well. We are complicated people, quite capable of doing lots of good and lots of bad. And the latter could outweigh the former, or vice versa. So just because we all do some right and wrong, doesn't mean we all do the same amounts, nor the same types of immoral things. There are limited amounts of things in our lives: time, energy, materials, money. So we should be cautious in how we use our resources. If we were parents to 10 children and we gave 5 of them all our energy, our time, our materials, our money, but we deprived the other half, how would those children all feel towards each other and towards us? Even if we loved them or felt especially close to some of them, still, if we have had children, isn't it our duty, our responsibility to nurture all of them? If we idolise some people, it means some people attain our energy, our time, material and money at the cost to other people who might have required our assistance. There's another reason idolatry can lead to bad thinking and bad behaviour. If we deify someone into a godlike figure as perfect, it creates unrealistic expectations. We would all therefore be condemned by such a perfect man. We, who are all flawed to a varying extent, will live in the shadow of this fictional man-god. Having this fictional man-god may seem to some inspiring, like Superman, yet it is nothing like our own experiences of having good and bad tendencies and a struggle between the two. Those are my experiences, both of myself and of others. And I mean that when I truly know someone, if I meet someone briefly, they may well appear bad or good. And that's not the whole of them. Knowing someone at a forensic level means knowing them in the fullest sense of the phrase, knowing them for a long period of time, knowing them under severe stress, seeing the whole nature under different conditions, knowing the whole of them. It's quite common for people to be posthumously idolised. Naturally, we want to think best of those that have died. And, of course, it's good to look back and remember the happy times. But we should also look back at the good and the bad in someone. We serve them and ourselves best when we are honest, both about our virtues and our flaws. The phenomenon of idolising the dead can be seen in religion, in the portrayal of Jesus, who does not seem to have many flaws recorded about him. Yet we can be sure that any real historical person will have had their faults as well as their virtues. No one should be beyond fair criticism, because it's through this process that we grow, if delivered sensitively. It's not just some Christians that idolise prophets. There are some Muslims too that may view Muhammad as beyond criticism, something that Orthodox believers would have actually seen as blasphemous, since only God, in their view, is perfect, and no man would have a perfect-like status without any exceptions. But it's not just in religion, but also in other fields, like in politics. There can be a tendency sometimes, well, would you want to tell an all-powerful emperor their faults? If done sensitively and in the correct way, with the hope of appealing to their better nature and wanting them to grow and to improve like anyone else, then it may well be that the right emperor will accept the criticism delivered in the right way. Yet, with all of us, we can all be upset to hear genuine criticism. It can be hard to take, especially when we are sometimes in denial ourselves. It helps to try and give a balanced view of someone. If you're going to tell someone what you really like about them, why not say what you dislike too? Why not try and be balanced in your approach? And of course, how we put across that information, rather than being blunt and saying it in front of others, why not be discreet and say it in a compassionate tone, looking at it in the context as well. Of course, one person may already be very aware of their own faults, yet they may lack insight into their virtues, or vice versa. So before we deliver our verdicts, we must consider if it will benefit them, and also, is our criticism genuine? Is it based on information that's reliable, on knowledge that we've gathered from a reliable source, that's something that we can trust and something that we can know and be totally sure about? Or is it something that's vague and we're doubtful and is possibly rumour and therefore could possibly be an unfair criticism of someone? Are we prosecuting them for something that they have actually done and something that is actually harmful? In the case of extreme fanaticism, There is a real danger of allowing any of us too much power. Absolute power can only exist with absolute submission. Idolatry is an extreme, since we all have our different kinds of virtues and we all have different kinds of flaws. If we were given too much power and idolized, then it would magnify our virtues, but potentially also our flaws. Thus, there is wisdom in a council of angels. Any one of us, if we were given a supreme dictatorship, could do great harm, since we all have got some wrong things with us. And those wrong things, if they were magnified, could become really big wrong things. And that's true of anyone. Even a supposedly benevolent dictator that was well-intentioned would still have some flaws, and if blindly followed, would still lead the masses to crazy behaviour. One doesn't have to be a theist to be against idolatry, of course, or for a realistic account of people. In fact, for an atheist, the question is, why, if you don't believe in God, would you treat things or people as if they are God? For the theist who believes in God, idolatry is blasphemy. But it's not wrong because it's written down in an ancient book or lots of people believe it. There are many reasons why it's wrong, and if you study history, you will find countless examples. Indeed, even in our own day-to-day lives, we can all have the potential to sometimes deify or idolise our friends, our family, people that we meet, even celebrities. And we can even do it to ourselves sometimes, but always at a cost. Because sometimes we need to see the whole of the person. We need to see the good and the bad in the person. When we have tendencies to idolise, it distorts the truth, distorts the way that we think, and therefore distorts the way that we act, since thinking often leads to how we think, how we behave, and our conduct. There are many different things that we idolise today in the world, just as there were in ancient times. The type of things that we idolise today probably have changed somewhat, but some things are still the same. The tendency to idolise each other, ourselves, our friends, our family, people in different fields of expertise that we may look up to. If we have a love of science, it could be a scientist, a love of art, it could be a dancer, a musician or a painter. It could be a philosopher or theologian even. It could be a thing, it could be a book that we've tended to think as infallible and we've treated like God. It could be a painting, it could be a movie, a film, a television program. It could be any number of things. It could, of course, be a drug that we have tended to think is our God. We wake up in the morning and use it. We use it last thing at night. We use it throughout the day. It's something that we couldn't imagine ever being without. And yet there could be a time when we do have to live without it. It could be a substance. It could be a possession. It could be money. It could be shopping. It could be clothing. And it could even be an idea or something that we think that actually is the source of our happiness. But if it's just an idea and that idea turns out to be wrong, even if it's a small amount of wrong and it has some right, but it's not totally right, even then it could eventually let us down. So we need to be extremely careful about what it is that we depend, what it is we depend upon, and what it is that we idolise. I think we all have a tendency sometimes to idolise. I've done a little brainstorm of different things that different people will idolise. We sometimes, as I said, idolise religious institutions, could even be universities or scientific institutions. Sometimes it's science itself that some people idolise. Science can be of great use and has brought us many great inventions in the world. Of course, inventions can be used to cause great harm and sometimes great help, So we should learn to see the good and the bad in all things and look at things as objectively as possible. For some people, there's a tendency to idolise the nation or the country. And it's good to be loyal to the people that we live around and to serve the country as we see best. But at the same time, to be overly patriotic and overly loyal to something, when of course there's other people in the world that we should also consider who are also human and also have human rights, and are also part of our extended family. Therefore, they also need some consideration at least. We can sometimes be overly loyal to all sorts of things. It could be our race, for some people that can lead to racism, where we think we've got more loyalty to people because we happen to be from a certain race, when in fact people from other races can have just as many great things to offer us and just as much harm sometimes to offer us. For many people, they idolise some things in the planet, whether it's animals for some people. Some people, it can be the whole earth. Some people have got this notion of we've got to save the earth, or the earth is what gives us the source of our life. There are many people that feel that that's what it is. And I suppose there is a degree of truth that the earth does provide us the sustenance, and the earth certainly provides us the food, the materials, the clothing, and everything you see around you that makes up your shelter, and the things that you depend upon, and the medication, and of course, the good and the bad that we take from that. But there's good and bad in nature. There's animals that are harmful to us. There's earthquakes, there's tsunamis, there's good and there's bad weather. And, nature can be a source of great destruction as much as it can be a source of great help and benevolence towards us. So I think idolizing nature itself, I would think misses the point that there actually are harmful and destructive forces within nature, and that we shouldn't copy and see that as something to follow. As great as animals are, they're not a role model for us of how to live by. And the elemental things, the rain, the water, the earth itself, of course, the sun, the moon, all great wonders and great things to behold. But again, they can't be the source of our happiness. We can't just depend on only those things for inspiration. Things within creation that can come and go, that can be good and bad sometimes. Having too little sun can be bad, having too much can be bad. So we need to look for things in balance, of course, and we need to be cautionary about looking up and treating anything as if it's God. And I think in the modern age, perhaps it's technology more than anything nowadays that we perhaps have a tendency to overuse, whether that's television, or whether that's computers more and more now. Like in the old days, of course, when, of course, people used libraries as the source of their information and knowledge back then. Well, of course, knowledge can be used for good or bad, and we need to look at it as a neutral thing, that when it's good, it's very good. When it's bad, it's potentially very harmful as well. And when we tend to look at it through rose-tinted glasses and we only see the good, then we perhaps have a tendency, therefore, to miss being fairly critical and seeing the bad when it can be bad. And so trying to be fair in our criticism requires us to treat each thing from as neutral a perspective as we can be, and not treat it as it's a god, and not treat it in a demonic form, not to demonize something and only see the bad, and not to idolize it and only see the good, but to look at it as fairly and as objectively as possible. So I would say they're my reasons for why I think idolizing something too much can lead to destructive thinking and behaviours, and that it's a duty for all of us to try and help each other to see where we're going wrong and where we're idolizing other things too much. And that when we criticize each other, we should remember that we ourselves have faults and that we're not beyond criticism too. And we all can have a tendency to treat things too good and depend on things too much. And that idolizing anything can harm anyone. And that we need to look at it, therefore, in a balanced perspective. And that whether we believe in God or not, it's in all our interest to try and stop the amount of idolizing that we do in other people, and not want to be idolized ourselves, nor want to idolize others, and not want to be demonized equally, because where it's wrong to see only the good in someone, it's equally wrong to see only the bad in someone. We should seek an honest perspective, which is the honourable perspective. And like the old saying says, only the truth will set you free. And we become imprisoned when we see things distortioned. Those distorted ideas imprison us because they affect how we see and treat others, and how we treat the world, and how we relate to the world. And if we're distorted in how we look at the world, then it naturally follows that we are going to treat the world and different things in the wrong way. And sometimes we will do that, but we should be careful to try and prevent that as much as we can. And I would welcome any comments and feedback, because I think it's a fascinating idea and fascinating discussion, idol worship. And when I sort of looked into it, I sort of felt there was a lot more to it than I first thought. And I first assumed it would be something that would only be interesting to those people that were religiously minded and those people that believed in God. But actually, I've come to think more and more now that it's something that actually would be fascinating for anyone and is relevant to anyone. Because I think we all perhaps have a tendency to sometimes treat anything as God, whether it's money, whether it's power, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's food sometimes, whether it's any number of things. And it can be different things for different people. I've got a cluster of different things that I'm struggling with, to be honest. So I'm not saying this from any position where I'm not struggling. I certainly am. And I suppose it's good when I'm struggling, and then sometimes when I'm not, I suppose I sort of give in to those things sometimes. And I look at it as a long road, and there's a long way to go. But I think that it's relevant to all people, even people that are atheist or agnostic, and different people of different religious persuasions. I think it's relevant to everyone, actually. And I think it's relevant perhaps for different reasons, whether it's a theological or a psychological reason, but it still has relevance. And I think it's interesting where there's that crossover between psychology and theology, where it seems to overlap between those two subjects. I think that is actually, for me, a fascinating interest. And I think I would welcome other people's perspective to see and hear what they would like to say about that. And I think actually it's a really fascinating debate. I found when I looked into it, I assumed it was quite a simple issue, but actually I found there's a heck of a lot more to it. And actually it's something that I thought didn't relate to me that much, but I find is actually something that I'm doing and I'm guilty of often. It's actually got me into a lot of trouble in the past, and it's something that I'm still involved in a struggle with. So I think it's still relevant to me, and I actually think I can see that it's relevant in different ways to different people, actually. So yes, I would welcome different comments, and I'm really intrigued to know what other people think about it. And